Hello, it's Nerfcraft, and this is Dameon's level 7 upgrade. So, as you can see here, we have a chassis assembly, as well as an RPM hybrid transmission box for my Rustler. So, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be swapping out this chassis for this, like this whole assembly, because the bulkhead is in pretty bad condition. The screw posts on that are cracked. The back here is stripped out on the chassis. It's just kind of in bad shape, so time to put on a new one. And I have the transmission box, because this one's cracked too, and it's warping where the screws are, of course. These things are just kind of worn out. Time to put on some new parts. So let's go ahead and get into it. First thing I'm going to do is remove the 3 screws that hold on this rear bumper mount. With the wheelie bar mount removed, I can take off the tires and take off the transmission box cover. With the gearbox cover removed, I can now remove the motor by removing the 2 screws that hold it on. I will also be taking off the slipper clutch and spare gear by removing the 1 nut that's holding it on. With the motor and slipper clutch removed, I can now remove the screws holding on the shock tower. There would normally be 4, but one of them got lost, so I only have 3. Now I can remove the 2 pin screws that are holding the A-arms to the transmission box, and I can remove the 6 screws that hold the transmission to the chassis. Now I need to remove the pin screws that hold on the output yokes to the transmission. Next, I can remove the 5 screws that hold this transmission box together. With those 5 screws removed, we can now go ahead and open up the RPM transmission box. So here we have some stickers. The transmission box has the mounting plate for the motor, what are they? Kind of like the legs for where the A-arms attached, and some hardware. So let me see if I can figure out how this all goes together. So of course the first thing I need to do is open up this transmission box and transfer all the gears into this transmission box. There should be 3 gears in here. Take this tape off. But there should be 3 gears in here, one of which has the shaft for the slipper clutch right there, and for each of those gears should be 2 Teflon washers and 2 bearings. So let's get that all transferred to here. Now that the gears have been transferred, we need to add some grease. For that, I just use this silicone based grease. With the gears installed and greased, it's time to assemble this transmission box, and I need to figure out how to do that. But my guess is that this side of the transmission box needs to attach to the other side like so. Yeah, and I'll figure out how to do the rest from the instructions. So first thing we need to do is attach the gear cover mount to one side of the gearbox, the right side right here, and you need to use some of the screws that were included. It should be the 12mm screws, button head ones. Next we need to screw the 2 halves of the box together using mostly stock screws, except for one 16mm screw, 16mm button head screw that RPM includes, and this one is going to go right up here. The rest go in their normal places. Okay, a couple quick things I need to warn you about. First off, don't put screws in these 2 holes. Those are going to go in from the other side when you put on your metal plate. Other thing is that usually you will have one screw slightly shorter than the rest from your transmission box. That one needs to go in this corner. Next we'll need the included 25mm flathead screws and a 12mm button head screw so that we can attach this. So what you're going to do is you're going to line it up on the gearbox, making sure everything keys together properly. Then you're going to put the flathead screws in these two holes by the shaft and the button head screw down here at this last little tab down here. Next we're going to need our toe adjustment parts. Can't think of what those are called. As well as two flathead 12mm screws. But for now I'm going to go ahead and use the 3-degree toe. Now I finally figured out what they're saying. We need to put the toe adjustment links straight onto a chassis using the rear two screws. So that's what I'm going to be doing right now. You will also need some nuts to hold the screws in place. So don't forget to use those. Just these little lock nuts right here that RPM includes. Next, we need to put the RPM transmission box onto the chassis, lining up the front ears onto the toe adjustments. And then we need to turn it over and put in these two really long 18mm flathead screws. These are the thicker M4 ones, and they're going to go through the front here all the way through and hold on the RPM transmission box. Another little tip, if you're trying to put the nuts on, I found out that the 4-way wrench is perfect for doing that. It's the right size. So let's go ahead and get this transmission box installed. Now we can install the remaining 12mm flathead screws into those last two holes on the bottom of our transmission. So that's all that we need to do with the RPM gearbox right now. So next I can go ahead and reinstall the rear assembly of my truck. Now if you remember, I was missing one of the screws that holds in the shock tower. However, RPM included an extra 12mm button head screw. So this is what I'm going to be using for the shock tower, because that's actually the correct length. Now I can reinstall the inner half shafts to the transmission. Next I can slide the half shafts back together and screw in the A-arms again. Alright guys, now that that's finally done, I can start working on the rest of this truck. So I'm going to go ahead and remove pretty much all the screws from this truck. I'm going to start with the 4 screws that holds on the ESC plate, the 4 screws that holds on the upper deck of the chassis, and the 3 screws that holds on the bottom of the bulkhead to the chassis. So let's get all that disassembled. Next I can remove the upper deck on Dameon. There should be 4 screws, 2 up front and 2 in back, but I lost 3 of them. 3 of the screws, I kid you not. And that's why I'm doing this. So I'll take out the remaining screw, which will be used for the new chassis. Forgot to tell you guys that I'm now removing the servo, which is just 4 screws, and the steering bell cranks, which is 2 screws. I'm trying not to take everything apart, because if I can keep it together as much as possible, that'd be nice. Now I can remove the 3 screws that are holding the bulkhead to the chassis. Now I can remove the 2 screws holding on the shock tower to the bulkhead, and the 2 pin screws holding the A-arms to the bulkhead. Now I can remove all the screws to the waterproof box for the receiver and unplug the electronics so that I can swap this side over to the new chassis for now, the front of the truck. Now that the steering assembly has been put on the new upper chassis deck, I can take a quick breakfast break. Alright, now that I'm done with breakfast, I can attach the shock tower to the new bulkhead as well as the A-arms, same way they came off. Time to install this back onto the new chassis. Make sure, I'm way out of frame. Time to install this on the new chassis, making sure not to pinch the servo wire. I am going to have to find another screw for the rear, and I thought I was going to have to do the same for the front, but I think I lucked out because RPM had to include a couple extra screws to mount their transmission box to the chassis. And because of that, I now have a couple extra screws, M4 screws. So now I can use these for the bulkhead. Now I can finish transferring over the receiver box. I'm also going to put the screws from the ESC plate into the new ESC plate through this chassis. That's why I took that off. I don't want that hardware. I want nice hex hardware. So let's finish moving the receiver box over, as well as the screws for the ESC plate. Alright, now the rest of the receiver box has been transferred, and the last thing I'm going to do is move this little tiny bumper onto the front of my truck. And this is it, guys. Dameon now has a new chassis assembly and transmission box. Now, I'm sure just about everyone has noticed that I did not finish a lot of this truck, mainly in the rear end. There is a very good reason for that, but I will be explaining that in Dameon's next upgrade, his level 8 upgrade. So for now, this is Dameon's level 7 upgrade.